author of Mowing Leaves of Grass, Fire, Revolutionary Chicano poet Matt Sedillo. Welcome, Matt. How are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. We have a 3-hour time difference, but I'm still drinking through it.
Cool. Yeah, 3 hours. Hopefully, hopefully maybe I don't know which time zone would be better for folks at this time, but hopefully there's somebody with a time zone that this is a good time. This is a good time for somewhere in the world
Yeah.
that may be watching this. So we'll get right into it. The 29th, exactly a week ago today, marked the 50th anniversary of the Chicano Moratorium, the largest anti-war demonstration in U.S. history, working class led, led from an oppressed nation. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Chicano Moratorium?
Yeah, the Chicano Moratorium took place in 1970. The planning for that went in for a while, and there's some incredible people who were involved. In the first one that were present at the 50th, such as like Rosalio Munoz, as well as Carlos Montes and several others who were there from the very beginning. And yeah, it was coming at a time when Chicanos, who at the time I believe made up something like 5% of the country, yet were 20% of the dead in Vietnam, and they were essentially cannon fodder, which all working class people are cannon fodder in imperialist war, but they were particularly expendable cannon fire within imperialist war, right? So it's it's kind of a rate of cannon fire ability, I suppose. And it was pretty grotesque, and so many people felt our fight is not there, our fight is here, because we find living in the United States of America, we're subject to police terror, we're subject to unequal education, we're subject to low paying jobs, we're subject to dangerous work, we're subject to all types of conditions that would indicate that we are not fully enfranchised and incorporated within the United States. So why are we going to go fight and die for this place, right? So that was kind of the impetus behind the original Chicano Moratorium. Tens of thousands of people gathered from all different parts of the country into East Los Angeles, and there was a march with planned speakers, and it was broken up by essentially a police riot, and there were people killed. Ruben Salazar, the most famous among them, as well as Diaz and Lynn Ward were also killed, and they were killed, kind of fighting out with the cops. But Ruben Salazar was killed. Now, Ruben Salazar was a very important figure at the time. He was working for the Los Angeles Times, as well as working in a radio station, and he was a very important voice for the struggles that were going on. East LA. He was kind of a growing voice, and he'd been targeted by intelligence agencies for a number of years, and many people believe that he was assassinated. I mean, he was straight up assassinated. They fired a gas canister into silver dollar, and he was killed. Now, later on, years later, there was all kinds of there was supposedly an FBI investigation into it, like a super secret one, and they concluded that no, it was just an accident. And some people accept that. Obviously, I'm a little more skeptical, but yeah, that was the Chicano Moratorium, the original.
Wow. Right on. There was a good podcast, the Razonita podcast, where they interviewed Ernesto's dad, and he went in to talk about how even in anti-war spaces there was racism and discrimination, and this idea, I thought it was really beautiful, like the masses of people that came from an oppressed community against a war, that were organized from themselves, as the Panthers would say, from the masses to the masses, and it was just absolutely beautiful and powerful. And I recommend any contact here in the United States, Aslan, Europe, looking into the Chicano Moratorium. There's lots of history to read. There's lots of documentaries to look up. So let's fast forward 50 years. So last week, was it? I think I just shared a meme. There was it over 1,000 people? About the numbers, but
Yeah,
was,
the numbers
go
are.
ahead.
I mean, I was there. It seemed, yeah,
Uh-huh.
it seemed like it reached 1,000. I mean, the papers are reporting hundreds, but there was a lot of people there. There was a lot of people there. Yeah, I'd
And
say
with
so.
COVID and all that, so there was a large scale mobilization just recently. Probably a lot of work and organizing. There was a diversity of groups. It supported Black Lives Matter, tied it into the current issues. I didn't see very many Biden signs.
No.
There was indigenous culture and dancing. Can you tell us a little bit more about maybe some of the organizing that went into the 50th anniversary event, some of the speakers and how it was?
Yeah, I mean, well, one thing I forgot to mention was that in the aftermath of the Chicano Moratorium, there was an inquest into the death of Ruben Salazar, and in the inquest, here in the city of LA, there was essentially, I can't remember his name right now, but the leading, the DA or whatever, there was an attempt to really put the entire movement on trial, and they were questioning Raul Ruiz, the photographer, and they were asking him about broken windows, and if he saw anyone breaking any windows, and he had any photographs of anyone breaking any windows, right? So they wanted to ask about property damage in anything that was supposedly an inquest into the death of Ruben Salazar. In addition to that, they also questioned him about Che Guevara signs that were present at the first moratorium. So this is kind of like, you see this mentality of blaming the victim, but doing it in these really very grotesque and obvious manners that you still see today. So that's kind of like a historical continuity of that. But as to this, I mean, it was a great thing. One of the co-chairs was Lupe Carrasco Cardona, who's a great organizer here in the city of Los Angeles and beyond. She's a teacher, ethnic studies advocate, as a pedagogue, I guess. Yeah, a pedagogue. She develops curriculum. Really, really incredible person. So she was one of the co-chairs of the entire thing. So there was a heavy involvement. Her and the organization Union de Barrio was very pivotal in a lot of some of the organizing. CSO was really big in it as well. As represented by Montez, as well as Marisol Marquez played a huge role in developing it, and as well as La Raza Unida with Ernesto Ayala and the whole Ayala family and various other members of LRU were really instrumental in putting this together. So there's a number of organizations, as well as some more other organizations who were also involved, but it's like unions and I don't know. I don't want to get into it because problems, but like people wanting to bring Biden signs and shit, but that all got shut down. So good. But anyways, I don't want this to be an interview that launches 1,000 beefs, but but yeah, no, you're right. But I have to correct you though. There was a Biden sign there. It said Raza sí, Trump no, and Ichale con Joe, which means power to the the Raza, power to the people, Trump, fuck Trump, and get the fuck out of here, Joe. So Ichale con Joe. So that was there.
I thought it was amazing from the video footage I saw. There wasn't as many Biden signs because whenever you go to a left milieu events, like
what I'm saying,
doors,
what I'm saying is there was the Biden sign that was there was telling Biden to fuck off.
Oh, okay, good. So
there was
I got okay, I got it. So there was a Biden sign, but it was against Biden.
It was against Biden.
So that makes it even better. And that's amazing. It's like usually when you try to organize a amount of people on that scale, and you have, I mean, not everyone's going to agree,
Yeah.
but the focus in the community and like the positions of the community were powerful, revolutionary, like that you don't see in a lot of places. Can maybe you can explain a little bit about where people were coming from and how the event went?
Well, there's also, I mean, there's also a huge contingent of brown berets that were kind of like
Mm,
running security. So they were there as well. So I should point that out. Yeah, it was just people, and the brown berets. They actually, I would have to say, I mean, I don't know for a fact where everyone else is coming from, but from the brown berets, the ones I talked to, they were the ones that were coming from all over the country this time around for the 50th. I mean, you
mm,
had people all the way from Houston, and people coming in from just different parts of the country. Um, a lot. There was a contingency from Fresno as well. There was a lot. There was at least like 3 or 4 people coming from Fresno and Merced and Central Valley. So there was a number of people coming out. It was great, and the people there was very anti-imperialist. It was very fight the power. It was very it was definitely not Democratic line. I mean, it was definitely very anti-Trump. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Um, but it was definitely something where you could feel that you could feel a very revolutionary you could feel a very revolutionary air, and it was definitely an anti-imperialist. This is the anti-imperialist club. It was definitely an anti-imperialist show. I mean, you had people chanting and giving speeches, not just on stage, but like during the march itself. People were with megaphones and start giving speeches. And this one guy giving this whole speech about the CIA and its involvement in the overthrow of governments everywhere. And this is walking down the streets of Whittier Boulevard. 1,000 people. So that's incredibly strong. But it's not unique. I mean, it's not something that doesn't happen from time to time. I mean, I remember during the 2016 election, um, Hillary Clinton came to East LA on Cinco de Mayo, and there was a lot of support to go see her, but there was a huge counter protest, and I'd say there was at least 1,000 people that counter protest. It's kind of like this unwritten history thing. I mean, I was there. I mean, I saw it, and that was people, people, chanting, you murdered Berta Caceres, these signs, all these, signs in the air, and people just yelling. And I remember one of the speakers, they said the same thing with Joe. They said to Joe, it's like that's why we say Hillary Clinton is an imperialist, and that's why we say Charlie Hillary. So, that was really kind of um, and for those who don't know, Chale is like it's like shut the fuck up. It's like you're full of shit. Like shut up, right? I mean, get out of here, right? And so that's what that was that was what was going on there. So yeah. So I mean, yeah, it's happened before. I mean, having these large, specifically anti-democratic and not like fascist reactionary type Republican marches. That's actually really relatively common. And I remember trying to explain it to somebody after the fact, and I said yeah. They're like, wait a minute, you're telling me there was a march against Hillary? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, well, were they for Trump? And I said, fuck no. And then they're like, well, were they for Bernie? And I said, well, there were some, but like not really, not most people. And he said, well, who are they for? And I said, well, they were for themselves. And he's like, what? You didn't get
Oh,
it. Yeah.
um, you probably weren't involved. I'm not sure. I know there was a small detail,
Yeah.
um, and I think it's popular and it's correct, but they changed Raza Si Guerra No to Raza Si Trump No.
Yeah.
Was this trying to like? What are your thoughts on this? You know where this came from, and I think this represents this is a big thing. Like, was it a popular? I could see this would help with organizing when you have literally a fucking racist in the White House. I
Yeah.
mean, it helps to get people angry and out. But also, I kind of see like guerra is like universal anti-imperialist term
Yeah.
and more universal. So can you maybe talk about that
I
slogan?
think, yeah, I think that Trump is extremely racist, but it's
Mhm.
also really important to think that it's also really important that to remember just like how bad this whole thing started. I mean, like there's a level there are levels to things, right? And it's just really important to remember, just rhetorically, anyways, just how bad this whole thing started, and just how the level of simmering hatred there is for this man within like the Mexican and Central American kind of communities, because I mean, they're talking about a guy that like is calling people drug dealers and rapists openly, talking about a guy calling people's countries shitholes. I mean, like that, it's really really bad. It's like extreme. It's like extreme. And so I'm not saying that the conditions are the actual like policy and this and that. I mean some of it's like really, I mean like the separation of children stuff like that. I mean, it's horrific. But there was horrors in other times as well. And so I'm not saying that that is what um, is just like, oh my god, right? But the rhetoric of it, right? It simmers in people in a certain kind of way. So by saying Trump no, it really actually it was a way of getting more people out. Yeah, I agree. It was a way of getting
Yeah.
more people out. And because there is a burning hatred of this man that it is somewhat unique because of simply because of things he said, and simply because of his cavalier attitude about oppressing people. It's like kind of like the question of insult to injury, right? Which I wouldn't diminish in the way in terms of the revolutionary potential of insult to injury. I mean, you look at so many things throughout history. It's that insult to injury that is oftentimes a catalyst for things to. It's not always, but like oftentimes, there's just something about getting fucked over and then someone laughing at you as they fuck you over. That's just like the final straw. You know what I mean? And so there's a kind of a question. I think that there is certain things like Trump operates kind of as a motivating factor oftentimes, and not just for liberals. I mean, what I'm saying. He does ignite of kind of a passion in people that that other politicians have not in the past. Because he is so crude and he is so direct. But we'll see with Joe Biden. I think Trump's probably going to end up winning, but like anybody either way, I think Joe Biden is full of insult as well. I mean, he's full of fucking crude and stumbling, and I think that we have entered the period of American history where we're just going to be like ruled by bumbling idiots. I think we're in the era of bumbling idiocy in late stages of empire. So I think that's the direction it's headed. I mean, you saw preludes of it with Bush Jr. and Palin and here we have Trump and Biden. So here we go. You know?
Right on. So we talked about what the event that happened 50 years ago from the community. We talked about the event that commemorated. I saw on Telehagwire they're already talking about organizing for next year. Um, what's we're starting to get a few people around. I have viewers from all over the United States, viewers from Europe, and a lot of this stuff is foreign to them. And so maybe we can start with a little bit of the basics. There's a few terms that we use that maybe some of my viewers aren't familiar with. So we mentioned the slogan "Raza sí" and "Guerra no," which translated is "the people," I believe,
Yeah,
yes, and "war no." So maybe you can maybe we'll talk. Maybe we can talk about a few terms. Maybe we can first talk about what does raza mean, and then Chicano. Like what is? Can you tell us a little bit of the history behind some of these terminology?
yeah. Well, Rasa is like it literally means the race, but it really kind of it really just means like the community, like the people. It's kind of interesting, in Mexico, and as well as in the Mexican section of America, right? There are a number of words for the people, right? So like el pueblo, which is really like the town or the community, the town essentially, also means the people, right? So raza, which is the race, also means the people. There's a number of ways of just saying like the people, right? And so raza is one of those ways. And raza sí is like like saying like it's you wouldn't say that unless you were oppressed, right? You wouldn't say that like we're great unless someone's telling you you're not. Just gonna you know like up and just say that for out of nowhere, right? And so like that's kind of an affirmation of dignity, right? And Guerra no, so that'd be like Raza sí, Wilson no, Raza sí, Trump no, Raza sí, ICE no, Raza sí, La Migra no, Raza sí. So like saying like Raza sí and then something else no is kind of an old chant, right? So Raza sí Guerra no would mean like like the community yes, war no, and that is kind of that was kind of a chant that was a chant during the Chicano Moratorium. And again, that was going back to the conditions of people, going and dying. I mean, if you look today, I mean, the treatment of Chicanos, or people of Mexican extract living in the United States, is still horrible. I mean, look what happened to Vanessa Guillen. Look what happened to this gentleman, elder. Can't remember his last name right now, but there was a number of other people. Coming from different ethnicities, also a few white people and some black people as well, but mostly raza, being killed at Fort Hood. I mean, like what is going on there? What is going on there, and why is there not more, of an investigation, or more of why are there more answers coming out there? It seems to be continuing happening. So whatever's happening in Fort Hood is continuing to happen because whoever's doing it is still in power, and the value, even when news breaks and it's national, there's no investment in fixing this thing. So these are still the conditions that Rasa find in the, when they join or are involved with the U.S. military. So it's a horrible thing. So that's what it is. Rasa si guerra no. It's the community yes and war no. And so you still have military recruitment, crawling all over these high school campuses, and it has an effect on the people. I mean, like, I want to be very clear, not paint this picture where the Chicanos are just this revolutionary group who have no ties or like U.S. imperialism has not shaped their consciousness in any kind of way, and they're just completely resisting. No, it's not true. And they join the military, they go and fight and they kill. They don't just die, they kill. And if you look throughout, like the east side of Los Angeles, and you look throughout the San Gabriel Valley, where a lot of these communities live, you'll find POW MIA flags all over the city squares. So this, U.S. imperialism in many ways has, like a vampire, is sucked its teeth into the Raza's neck, but has also affected them in ways in which, like, again, there's people who resist that kind of thing, and those are people that make up the people that go to the moratorium. But there's also people who embrace it, who embrace that U.S. imperialist, that mentality, and go and kill and die for a country that will elect a man who calls them drug dealers and rapists, and so that kind of that kind of ideology needs to be combated, not just with the larger U.S. population, but within the Chicano people itself. I don't want to say within the movement, because the movement's very good and the movement's very strong. The movement's very much against war, right? For the most part, but like with some exceptions, that needs to be combated as well. It's probably the most thing that needs to be immediately combated. But beyond that, within the community itself, these ties to U.S. imperialism, these ties to American identity, these ties to these things, it needs to be collapsed. I mean, because what is American identity? I mean, what is American identity? If there's something that unites us, it's imperialism. You know what I'm saying? If there's something that unites all the various demographics, oppressed nations, etc., in this country, it is, the talons of this murderous empire, right? That's if there is anything that unites us, it's a rainbow coalition of death. That means murder and mayhem to the rest of the world, and that is the thorough line of quote unquote American identity, and it's definitely something not anyone should embrace, particularly not anyone who's oppressed within the United States of America.
Wow, that's a powerful answer. I've noticed that too. Like I'll be talking with someone, like I'll troll racist, and then I'll have anti-racist forces come up and be like, "Well, we all stand side by side and we fight for freedom," and it's which is a lie. And then I have to say they're not fighting for freedom, and they're like, "Are you talking about my uncle?" And I'm like, "Yes."
Right. I mean, it has to be combated. But you talk about that within the anti-war movement. There's a lot of racism. That's also true. I mean, within the anti-war movement, and it's because of the liberal. I don't mean liberal like liberal like Democrats. I mean liberal like just letting shit go, right? Like what Mao would talk about liberalism, right? This kind of liberal, like I'll march with a Nazi as long as they're against war. I'll march alongside I'll march alongside a Proud Boy if they'll, oppose the war. I'll march alongside a blah 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 as long as they oppose the war, right? That kind of attitude that you see kind of at the top of many of these like anti-war people and personalities, and I'm not going to name names because I don't know if I have people, but there's a lot of very prominent people who possess that attitude. Like, so long as you're an anti-war, I don't care if you're, a Klansman. As long as I'll march alongside anybody, as long as they're da, 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 da. And so that kind of liberalism around just like absolute stark racism, just like lizard people shit, like just like I mean, people in the anti-war movement in this country. I mean, they make passes for people who are forwarding things about like there's not enough white babies. What I'm saying? Like it's like it's not just like passive racism. It's not just like casual racism. It's like straight up eugenicists, man. They're straight up eugenicists in the anti-war movement, and that they don't people don't want to deal with it. I mean, I'll deal with it, but I end up dealing with it on an individual level. But yeah, that's true as well. So I mean, like, there's a lot of things that are true. There's a lot of things that are simultaneously true, and not all of them are good.
I think you're getting into something, and I would describe it as the difference between anti-interventionalism and
Mm,
anti-imperialism.
yeah,
And there's no mistake that an oppressed nation, as I would call it, as a reader of Stalin and Marxist Leninism, would organize from the community the largest anti-war or anti-imperialist demonstration. Maybe you can talk to us about that. Maybe, like, what is the Chicano people? How is that different from this Latinx word? What You often talk about the material conditions
yeah,
that exist, the level of exploitation.
yeah.
Um, Maybe you can talk about how being of an oppressed nation in the working class interacts with anti-imperialism.
Well, I mean, like, okay, so so the Chicanos essentially are originally from. I mean, when the idea of the Chicano, or what would you, not an idea, I mean, it's an experience. What would you describe as the experience of the Chicanos really begins with the Mexican American War, right? So it begins with the progressive imperialist war of America against Mexico to take the land. Now, it's totally erroneously taught in not California, but throughout the country, that the Mexican American War is simply a prelude to the Civil War, and therefore can be collapsed into that history. Right? It's not simply a cruel act, but it was actually an act pushed by Southern planners, and it was what created cause further tension with the Northern industrialists, and it was simply done because the Southern planners wanted more land to further both the slave trade as well as the agricultural basin they needed to grow foodstuffs and have increase the power of their slaveocracy. That's true. That's what the Southern planners wanted. It's also true that the Northern interests represent the railroads. I mean, like, Lincoln's a railroad president, and the railroads absolutely wanted more land to lay down railroads and build up factories and do all these things, right? So you had both sides of the contending forces of the Civil War that were going to that were proponents of this Mexican American War. And what's my evidence of this? Well, my evidence of this is that Jefferson Davis was a hero of the Mexican American War, as was Ulysses S. Grant, as was, I mean, like, you have like both contending sides, participating in the Mexican American War. What I'm saying? There's a whole Winfield Scott. I mean, there's a whole long list of people from Robert E. Lee. I mean, there's a whole long list of people that were part of the Union and part of the Confederacy that participated in this assault against Mexico. Now, within that, people, they raise all these questions, that range from very legitimate to ultra leftist about, like, well, what was the role of Mexico in these areas, right? What was the role of the government there? And some of the questions are legitimate, well, Mexico, it was a nation state, and before that was New Spain. So, like, what are we really talking about here? And what about the very various groupings of indigenous peoples and pueblos that exist in these territories, and what of them, right? And so, like, these are legitimate questions. But some of them are just like just totally like just in way geared towards discrediting any type of like the Chicano movement, right? But regardless of those questions to be hashed out in, like, what was Mexico and what was its relationship to the various to the old Costa system and its it's breaking down, and what was that complicated question. The reality is, in this time period of Anglo settlement, Mexicans were lynched for being Mexican, right? Mexicans as a group were lynched, right? And they were lynched. And it was like, you're brown enough not to be white, and you have some land. I'm going to lynch you. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to take this land. I mean, throughout the country, you had these things called, like, you had all these kind of new vagrancy laws coming up. I think in Texas there was something like there was like these local ordinances against vagrant cows. Right, people can get their land seized if they had vagrant cows. So I mean that was one of the big things. But then, in the state of California, you had what was known as the Foreign Miners Tax, as well as the Greaser Act in the late 1840s, early 1850s, and that was really kind of these major vagrancy acts that essentially allowed you to put people on chain gangs and steal their assets and do all kinds of things like that. That would actually, in some ways, set up the legal precedents for Jim Crow. Because you got to think about this is happening in the 1840s and 1850s. At that time, African Americans are still enslaved, right? So there is no Jim Crow because they're still in slavery, right? But these vagrancy laws that would take place in California actually set up a lot of what was going there. So if you look at the history of the Chicanos, what you're really looking at is a history of dispossession, is a history of proletarialization, is a history of very actually what Marx referred to as what we call primitive accumulation. It's a very almost textbook example. It's one of the best textbook examples there are in possibly in the survey of world history. I mean, you're looking at a group of people who at one point in time are kind of tilling the land and kind of like living kind of a kind of agricultural kind of merchant type economy, and then all of a sudden out of nowhere they're dispossessed of their land and they become the lowest paid worker in the land, and they remain the lowest paid worker in the land 150 years later. We're still at the bottom totem pole of this. We're still the cheapest labor around, and so that is essentially the condition of the Chicano. And you look at how it begins there. You look at the laws of dispossession that took place. Then you look into the laws of proletarization the laws and economics of proletarization that take place. Then you're looking at segregated schools. You're looking at segregated pools. You're looking at a system called sometimes called Juan Crow, where people are essentially separate, subjected to kind of a separate but unequal conditions in the American Southwest, and then from there to a more urbanized experience, which ends up results in urban rebellions. You see yourself in a city, and you see the disparities are clearer in a cityscape, and that usually causes people to uprise. And so they had several uprisings, and clashes with the cops, as are given to as is the rhythm of an urban rebellion. And so to today, where you have that continues. I mean, that continues. So it's that's what it is. I mean, if you look at the Chicano Moratorium that takes place in 1970 and 1968, you had the Chicano blowouts, which was the largest walkout of high school students in U.S. history to this day. So yeah, I mean, it's not this one thing. It's not an isolated incident. It was part of a time, and it was part of a set of conditions that people were facing.
So what you're saying is that people of native ancestry, Chicanos, people would call Mexican American Latinx, they don't hold these more lower paying jobs, more exploited jobs, because they just don't know how to be good capitalists. is that what you're saying? Like there's something more to that of why?
Honestly, yeah, it's something like that. But honestly, they are probably the best capitalists. We're talking about people who can. I mean, they're not really good at like putting huge amounts of labor, but like as far as like a bourgeois, I mean, you're talking about people who can like create a business out of like a push cart, So they're actually quite entrepreneurial. They're probably too entrepreneurial for no good. They're probably also, like, you ask me, there's far too much workerism. It's like people, like, I mean, it's internalized. I mean, like like I don't know any people who work harder, to be honest, but like we're myself included. I mean, when I was conducting interviews, I was doing like 9 or 12 a day. I mean, like that was That was pointless. I don't know why I did that, but I got so driven, and I think that comes from my upbringing of like you got to work hard, like so. But no, it's not just because they're unwitting or unwise, but when we're talking about what was referred to, Latinx or just Latinos, now you're talking about everybody. You're talking about all the diaspora of Latin America and all the people that throughout all the regions of the country, and they too find themselves they find themselves in positions of hyper exploitation, of disproportionate incarceration, but they arrive there. From their own historical trajectory. You know what I'm saying? The reason why the Puerto Rican has so much problem in America is not because of the Mexican-American War. It's because of the colonization of Puerto Rico. You know what I'm saying? So it's very important that there are issues that are commonly experienced by what we call Latinos, right? But there are particular national distinctions which exist, and that's not to be exclusionary, and that's not to be like draw lines and not be down and not be cool, but that's about to not lose the thread. And when I say not lose the thread, I'm not saying that this is particularly like way where it's hyper concerned with everyone feeling good or feelings. It's to have an intellectual clarity as to like, why is this? Why are we in this situation? What is going on here? How did this happen? And that's important not just for Puerto Ricans to understand like why why this is happening. It's important for everyone to understand that because Puerto Rico is very pivotal to the understanding of U.S. colonialism and U.S. imperialism and the direction of the country and the direction of that whole region of this country, right? Similarly with the Chicanos, I mean, it's not just important for the Chicanos to understand their own history. It's important for everyone to understand this. You know what I'm saying? I mean, particularly right now, it's very important because if you look at the manner in which Trump rose, and I'm not so fascinated or interested in Trump, but if you look at the manner in which he did this on the basis of the threat of demographic shift. He did this on the basis of threat, too many taco trucks on every corner. He did this on the basis of a lot of essentially that, right? Now, I don't think that it's not so much about him and the insult, how dare you? It's about the fact that this is going to keep happening because the conditions which he was speaking to aren't going anywhere. You know what I'm saying? That's going to continue. Like that drive, that pull, that changing of demographics, that changing of the country, the changing of its look and its complexion, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's going to keep happening. That's going to continue and it's going to accelerate. And as it accelerates, right, the fact that there are taco trucks on every corner is going to make people fight about it, as opposed to fighting for the fact that none of us know how we're going to eat tonight. You know what I'm saying? Because the economy is going to continue to implode. And as the economy continues to implode, you're going to be focused on some dumb shit like, oh my God, there was a cartoon and they were speaking Spanish and this isn't America anymore, as opposed to like, where are your kids going to live when you die? You're not answering these questions. You know what I'm saying? And so like that is kind of, that's going to continue. So to invest and to learn about the specifics history of the Mexican border and to learn the history of the Chicanos and to learn the history of U.S. imperialism and to learn the history of U.S.-Mexico relationships and to learn the history of U.S. and Central American history, to learn the U.S. and El Salvador, the history of U.S. and Salvador, the history of U.S. and Honduras, the very recent history of U.S. and Honduras, the history of U.S. and Guatemala, to learn the history of the U.S. interaction with these countries, right? And to understand like who came here and why, and to understand other things as well, like the history of the U.S. and Venezuela and the recent history there, and the U.S. history with Nicaragua and the U.S. history with Cuba, to understand that when you see these people called Latinos on television, and they tend to be either Cuban, Nicaraguan, or Venezuelan or some of this, right? Understand that does not necessarily represent the Nicaraguan masses or the Cuban masses or the Venezuelan masses. What that represents are gusanos, right? That represents these Miami politics. You know what I'm saying? Alan Navarro has become this champion of quote unquote the Latino people, the Latinx people, right? That's who Ana Navarro has been a champion of, right? Or seen as a champion of. Well, Ana Navarro is a Contra. She's a fundraiser for the Contra. Her father was a Contra. She's proud of her Contra father. I'm not holding against her that her father was a Contra. I mean, our parents are our parents, but like the fact of the matter, she's very proud of this man, and she's very proud to have helped raise funds for the Contras, and she speaks of like Ronald Reagan's support for the Contras as to like why she was a lifelong Republican until Donald Trump said all these things that were so insulting, right? So okay, so she's insulted. She's insulted because his attacks on Mexicans is and his attacks on Central Americans and his attacks on Puerto Ricans, and she just sees it as an attack on brown people in general. And okay, that's whatever. But CNN is placing her, and media is placing her as the great resistance to Trump, and this woman is a Contra, and she's supposed to be the voice of Latinos. And Joe Biden as well is reaching out to her, or has reached out to her, to put together like this a roundtable, this discussion group to speak about Latino issues and why Trump's so awful, right? And we're talking about a Contra, and so that is different. That is definitely the media's outlook and the media's attempts to do things. When Joe Biden actually, not too long ago, recently said that in a terrible, insulting manner, as is Joe Biden's general flavor, said that the Latinos are very diverse, unlike the African Americans, right? Well, first of all, that's a terrible thing to say. That's very insulting, right, towards African Americans. But what he said when he's speaking about Latino diversity, that means something very specific. And what he's talking about is this emphasis on Gusano politics, this emphasis on Miami imperial politics, right? This right-wing politics that comes from fascist, the fascist wing of social struggles. It comes from death squad culture.
Right on. I think that's what we're getting into. We're getting into the difference between liberal identity politics and a Marxist material analysis. And I mean, I could just go over it briefly. So the word Latino, which refers to a wide variety of groups from different countries, doesn't get into how Venezuela has kept poor for years, the resources that are extorted, the resources extorted from working class Chicanos today to African American people from slavery onto the day. And I think it kind of gets like the U.S. empire, like Obama, which was the child of Anglo-American and an African immigrant, not necessarily of the Afro-American nation. I think that's a similar difference into it. So I think for people who understand liberal politics, understand identity politics, I recommend you study the national question, study Black nationalism, study Chicano nationalism. That's where to go. So we touched on the national question.
Yeah, I mean, but the thing about that though, even the Gusanos or people who might come from wealthy backgrounds, coming from the African continent, and coming to America and wanting to distance themselves from the Black American experience, or wanting to distance themselves from those bad hombres over there, or wanting to distance themselves from her, are still subject to it. I mean, like the English only movement began. The modern English only movement began in Dade County after the Mariana boat lift. You know what I'm saying, like that. So it's not like these crackers want anybody. So I mean, like it's really when I say crackers, I don't mean all white people. I'm talking about
I got you. Okay.
Yeah. No, because I'm not like that. I mean everybody, but that's a very specific like demographic of people who fucking just are filled with hate and like are gonna like have like come out with the pitchforks and stuff like that. The pitchforks are never going to like you no matter what you say. I mean, that is what it is. So it's very important. But again, oftentimes you're not going to have that same kind of consciousness if you're not like reared in something that's like if you're not part of. I mean, you may or may not as an individual, but like in mass, there's a reason why in mass. There's a reason why in the name of you see these things. You know what I'm saying? So people can attach themselves to it and feel some similar experience, but the core of it, the core of it, it's going to be from these historical forces. You know what I'm saying?
Gotcha.
The center of it, and people can attach to it if they experience similar things, right? and they're like, forget my parents. This is what I identify with. It. I'm with this, right? Because that,
Mhm.
like, I'm getting messed up in this country. I want to be part of that, but it's not. But like that, the community itself, La Raza, right? Or the or like what I mean, like Black Power, or whatever. These things are different than individual people saying like I'm down. It's yeah. I want to describe this correctly, because I don't want people to say that people think that like it should be like, if you're not this, you can't be this. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? What I'm saying is there's an explanation as to why like you see like black led rebellion, right? And people get involved. There's an explanation as to why you see like Chicanos putting 100 people in the street, 50, 500 people in the street, 1,000 people in the street, 500,000 people in the street. There's a reason why you see um, certain struggles. There's a reason why you see Standing Rock. There's a reason why you see that, and why that doesn't just appear for all the various, we are the world communities of the United States of America. There's a reason why particular groups have these major, explosions of whatever. But that does not mean that other people who are adjacent to it, or even just completely different, like, should not be involved. That's what I mean to say.
Right on. Yeah, I think the empire can manipulate both racism and anti-racism for its benefit. And I mean, we're the working class. We're oppressed nations fighting against the imperialist system.
Yeah.
So we talked about the national issue. We talked about national oppression. Let's get into how that's relevant to anti-imperialism. And you said that what percentage of Chicano or Raza soldiers were killed in Vietnam? You mentioned that earlier.
So at the time, 1970, we're looking at we were 5% of the population. Today, I think we're like something like 10. The Latinx, everybody put together, something like 18. But Chicanos alone are about 10 to 12% of the U.S. population. So um, that's over 30 million people, right? So we're like 34, 35 million people. Um, so it's quite significant. And if you look at U.S. culture on television, media, and etc., there's nothing here that would indicate the country's 10% Mexican. There's just nothing that would indicate that, right? Particularly in certain regions where like it's 40, 50%. But anyways, that's a whole other story. But yeah, it was 5% of the dead, and I mean 5% of the country and 20% of the dead. Those are
20% of the dead. So they
20%.
were way more likely to die in these
Right.
wars.
More likely
So
to die. So why were they more likely to die? Were they more likely to die because they're stupid? Were they more likely to die because they didn't know how to use their weapons? They're more likely to die because they didn't have they were just whatever. No, they were more likely to die because they were put in the most dangerous positions, right? And so that is why they were most likely to die, because their lives are seen. In a capitalist war, everyone's life is expendable, right? But everyone but the capitalists, obviously. But some lives are more expendable, and they fell into that category.
there's obviously racism and national oppression within the
Right.
military, and you can see today with like the killings, the higher number of murders of Chicano and Raza Vanessa Guillen. There was a young man here in North Carolina, I think the child of Latin American immigrants, and it wasn't covered in the media. There's so much racial bias um, to this day that you know.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, it's bigger than that. Even if they were to get rid of the racial bias in the military, I think part of the reason, like the Chicano Moratorium was so big, is you had an oppressed nation, oppressed people that are exploited, kept in horrible jobs, extorted resources, kept in worse conditions, given less social services, going to attack another country that is being invaded, that people are being slaughtered to extort their resources.
Yeah.
So let's talk about international solidarity.
Well, but I want to talk about international solidarity in the abstract. We got to talk
Mhm.
about what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is the resistance of the Vietnamese, And the resistance of the Vietnamese is one of the most important events in world history, and certainly of the 20th century. I mean, we're talking about Dien Bien Phu. We're talking about the Tet Offensive. We're talking about talking about the Viet Cong, man. We're talking about a group of people who um, were under resourced and were able to defeat the Japanese, were able to defeat the French, and were able to defeat the Americans. I mean, that is an incredible feat, and it inspired the world. It inspired the world. So the victory, the heroic victory of the Vietnamese people against the forces of colonialism coming from multiple sources is an inspiration then and now, and it inspired the world. It inspired resistance in Algeria. It inspired resistance in Cuba. Inspired in the resistance throughout the world, throughout Africa, throughout the rest of Asia. And it inspired resistance here in the United States of America as the United States of America was bombing Vietnam. So it was not simply a sympathetic thing of like, hey, it's wrong to kill those people over there. They're simple, good rice farmers or something like that. No, I was saying that those people over there are fighting back. Those people over there are making strategy. Those people over there are making plans. Those people over there are a light into the world, right? So the Vietnamese struggle for liberation. The Vietnamese struggle against imperialism. The Vietnamese struggle against mighty, mighty empires, right? We're talking about the Japanese, the French, and the United States. This is one of the powerful empires to ever, stalk the face of the earth. And they fought them all, And so I think that that's very, very important to understand that it's not just oppressed people and oppressed people. No, it was the resistance of the Vietnamese, which was a match that lit the world. Their resistance was an inspiration to the world. So it's really, really important to not just honor that, but to speak accurately about that.
Right on. I mean, Che Guevara's 1, 2, 3. Was it 1, 2, 3 too many Vietnams?
Yeah. 20
So
yeah.
basically, we need to repeat what happened in Vietnam all over the world to destroy the common enemy, imperialism. And then I often mention that even Hollywood, like Star Wars, George Lucas just recently mentioned that the inspiration for the rebels was the Viet Cong, and that's the milieu and the cultural, the I don't know, like that was the ideas that was going on in his time period.
He's such an odd guy, isn't he? He's such an odd guy. No, that's cool. That's cool. I'm not aware, but he's such an odd guy. Like you think he's just a general capitalist where he's got these odd little sprinkles of just like what?
Yeah, and then Queen Amidala's hair was from Mexican revolutionaries, which
right.
So it's interesting. We have a group inspired by the in a big Hollywood capitalist American imperialist soft power production. You have a political group inspired by the Viet Cong that has a cultural almost appropriation of a Mexican revolutionary. So it's I mean it's
that's crazy. Right, it's an odd guy. He's an odd guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's definitely that's good. I mean, and so the Chicano Moratorium, is very much you saw signs at the moratorium. It's our fight is not in Vietnam, our fight is here. But then there was like books like Aslan to Vietnam. There was all kinds of just different things. But it's really important to remember it's not just that people like oppressed people killing oppressed people. It was the resistance. It was the resistance of oppressed people that inspired other oppressed people to resist. And the Vietnamese aren't the first people to do that, but I mean, there's you oppress groups of people, they're gonna resist, right? So I mean that happened. But just as Haiti in the early 1800s was an inspiration to so much of the world, so too of the Vietnamese in the 1900s.
Wow. So we've talked about Chicano Moratorium. We talked about Vietnam. Maybe we can get into a little bit of today's struggles. Maybe you could talk more about these recent killings of Raza Chicano soldiers, it being covered up. Um,
Well, I don't know any more than anyone else. I mean, like it's being covered up. It's they're being murdered, and that they're just it's Vince again. I can't unfortunately I wasn't really prepared to talk about this guy. I don't remember. I don't Elder. I don't remember his last name. But then there's like 3 or 4 other cases, and a lot of these have to do with sexual assault, and they're covering up. They're covering their tracks, but like the thing about it is just all these people are dying. So it seems to be that like whoever is doing all this stuff, whoever's in charge of all these things, whoever is, in that pivotal point of position of power, that they're still there and they tend to keep doing it. I mean that's that's the message that I'm pretty much getting from. That's a message that can be read from these incidents. So I think that's really true. It's really it's really it's really unfortunate that the conditions in many ways have not changed since since the days of the Texas Rangers. You used to kill a Mexican, bury him wherever. I mean, there was a case. It was one of the grisliest cases stories. I think it was 2015. One of these years, maybe it was 2000. I think it was 2015, where they found all these bodies buried in Texas, and it was covered by Democracy Now, and no one else touched the story because I guess it was just nobody couldn't believe it. They found bodies buried in the desert, and it turned out that they've been buried by the Border Patrol, and they said that they committed no crime by just burying unidentified bodies in the ground. That's fine. And so that discarding of and they could have been Mexican and they could have been Central American, but that discarding of brown people in this country, of people who look like those people, that has not changed. That has not changed, and under the current formation of this country, it will not change until this country is formatted differently. Until it's socially and economically, it's not gonna mean anything. So when I look at what happened in Fort Hood or what's happening in Fort Hood, I just see that just how disposable we are seen. And when I look at some of the people who have been killed recently, and the lack of media coverage for the people that have been murdered by the police, again I see that again, just that we're seen as just this disposable mass. That we're not here to play a part in the national story. That we are here, not here to play a part in the direction of the country. We're here to clean the dishes. We're here to mop the floors. We're here to clean up after you. And that's the consistent message that we get from this country. And we're here to die in wars. And before and if we complain, we'll die on the base. And so that's kind of the message and the lesson of Venice again.
wow, I think that actually really sums up our conversation. You wrote a poem and read it at the moratorium. Do you have that with you?
I think I think I wrote down in a notebook. So let me see if I have anything on my.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it's new. So I wish I know you actually asked me for this. So this is something I should have been able to have. But I have. Let's see how this goes. No, this isn't the right version of it. But I can tell you about it. I mean, like I can tell you about it. Maybe we can do another interview. I'll be better prepared. But I can tell you about like the idea that went into it. The idea that went into it was that I actually took a lot of the. I'll do the beginning part because this is a draft
Okay.
that wasn't the right draft. But it started off August 29th. Indians of all tribes. Somos Chicano la raza de Aslan. Brown is beautiful. Nuestra lucha está aquí. Our fight is in the barrio, not overseas. Then a gas canister shattered the silver dollar back when Salazar was Salazar was another park that they will shoot the messenger, then name a park in his honor, kill a man, then question the photographer. Now, so that part there, was what I wrote there was about the moratorium. But I took those signs, Indians of all tribes, Somos Chicanos, Chicanos Somos, all those signs were actually signs for the moratorium. So I took signs
Wow.
that people were carrying and I put it into the poem. But the whole idea of the poem was that, it's been 50 years since the moratorium, 50 years since or 50 years leading in. What's the difference? They just keep killing us, and that's that we got to fight back. And so that was kind of the message of the poem, which is like the message of most of what I do. Like, yeah.
All right, we're past the hour. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me. So again, I got this book, Mowing Leaves of Grass. Please check it out. I'm working on the next manuscript called City on the Second Floor, and that one's going to be very interesting because if this one was the Chicano Studies book, this one's the Chicano Studies U.S. history kind of survey, then the next one's going to be my foray into, I guess what we call sociology and Marxist geography. It's about cities and how they're laid out.
Right on.